All right, welcome everyone to this live session with Blue Street Data. I'm Kate Gallo, I'll be your moderator today. So thanks for joining. We are going to be going over, can better data be your AI advantage today? We've got two great expert speakers with us as well. So as we have some other attendees logging in and joining us, we're going to go through some introduction slides and walk through some frameworks for data quality, set the stage for the great conversation that we'll be having with Andy Hanna and Wyatt Schroth, who are joining us today. So I'm going to kick it off and introduce our two speakers. So I'm Kate, I'm your moderator for today. We've got Andy Hanna, CEO and co-founder of Blue Street Data with us, and Wyatt Schroth, head of product here at Blue Street Data. So I'm going to kick it off to you, Andy, first, and then Wyatt for some quick introductions.
Okay, sounds good. Hi everybody, I'm Andy Hanna, as Kate said. Data and data science has been part of my background for the past 30 years. Start out my entrepreneurial career back in the 1990s as we were mining data out of the former Soviet Union. So it was a time when the value of data was really being discovered, and I was grateful to be part of that. Just fast forward to my most recent startup before Blue Street Data was Othot, where we built a machine learning platform focused on higher education. That company was purchased by a large ed tech company up in Boston, where I spent 2 years as president of their AI and data science solutions division. And I'm also on faculty at the University of Pittsburgh, where I teach analytics, and I chair the advisory board for the provost on responsible data science. That's me.
Hi, everyone. I am Wyatt Schroth, and I work as head of product here at Blue Street Data. Over the past kind of 2.5 years, I've been focused specifically around the pain points that data buyers encounter when they're trying to go through the transaction process and trying to source unique and valuable data. And so over that time, I've worked a lot on developing and standardizing kind of both the process, but also creating standards around data quality evaluation. That way, when we work with organizations, we can help them drive the value of the data set relative to price.
Awesome. Thank you both for those introductions. So let's kick it off and dive into data quality and how we assess it. So in a recent MIT Sloan Management Review, they released a study that said that 85% of AI projects ultimately fail to deliver on their promises. And poor data quality is one of the main symptoms. So most of us on this webinar already know poor data quality is widespread. Sometimes it's hard to diagnose, and it has a really big and negative outcome on a lot of AI projects and different projects that teams are working on. From a different angle, Gartner just released a study as well that says that only 14% of organizations have a formal framework in place to assess third-party data quality. So having these frameworks in place to assess data quality, data provenance, help teams understand where the data is coming from, but it also helps entire organizations and teams have trust in the outcomes of these AI models and AI projects. So having these frameworks developed, having them, understood across all teams, across organizations and industries is really important. So that's what we're going to be diving into today is what do those frameworks look like? What do industry standards for data quality look like? And how can we adopt those in a very, streamlined way? So kicking this off, I think it's important to talk about the difference between data quality and data provenance. So they intersect a lot. They're related, and we want to look into, is provenance the root of quality, or is quality a byproduct of provenance? And if we look at traditional data quality measures, we can see that when we look at how good the data is that we're working with or that we're buying, we typically look at accuracy, completeness, consistency, timeliness, uniqueness, and validity. And those are pretty industry-wide standards for how we assess data quality in different data products across industries and teams. When we look at data provenance, which is where the data came from and how it was handled, we want to look at source transparency. So who is the original provider of the data set? What was the collection method of the data? The transformation history. So what changed about it? Who changed it? Why? How was the data set changed? The chain of custody. So this is who touched the data, when, and how. And then the reliability of the provider as well. So that's looking at governance, compliance, and reputation. And when we think about quality and provenance, you know, they're linked together, they intersect. And you can't really consider one without the other as well. So provenance really underpins quality there. Without knowing the origins of a data set, you can't really accurately look at timeliness and the accuracy of the data set. So to really have trust in the data set, you need to look at both provenance and data quality. And then in turn, quality then validates provenance, right? So the quality checks confirm whether the provenance actually delivers on what was promised in the data set. So as we go through this conversation, thinking about data quality and data provenance hand in hand here, data provenance needs to be considered to look at holistic data quality as well. So throughout this whole session, we're going to be going through industry standards for data quality, where you can improve quality in data products and vendors, some measurement frameworks for quality, and then how to systematize quality across all data projects and across teams. So we'll have some really good conversations with Andy and Wyatt here, and some tangible frameworks, outcomes, action steps that you can use and integrate into what your teams are doing with data. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Wyatt Schroth to talk through some of the data quality frameworks and standards that already exist.
Thank you, Kate. So to kind of set the stage on what you're looking at here, this is from a recent engagement that we did. This was a retail bank that was looking to do a consumer app end. They were looking to enrich their existing customer database with 84 different fields to understand a little bit better about their retail banking clients. And this is for an annual license for a consumer app end for just about 1 million individuals. And we looked at around 8 different providers to try and understand what their options were in the market that could service this use case. And you'll see when we plot data quality against the pricing, we're able to get a really good representation of where value is in the market. And so you'll see on that top right-hand side, you'll see that 7.89 BQI score, which is the Blue Street Data Quality Index. That's how we derive quality, and we'll dive into that a little bit later, for an annual license of roughly $200,000, $189,225 on an annual basis. And then you'll see that down here we have in the bottom right-hand corner, 8.32 BQI score for roughly $13,965 for an annual license. And this is something we continually see in a lot of the engagements that we do, is there's these huge spreads in terms of pricing for relatively, if not better quality, when you look at these smaller data providers, or these data providers that are less well known in the market. This is something that you'll see a lot of these organizations as well. There's a bit of cannibalism between them. So a good example is that 7.89 utilizes some of their data, or builds some of their data set based off some of the data derived from that 7.73. So that provider D takes some of theirs from this provider here at that 7.73 for 67 grand. A good example here, the kind of running rate of the market is at that 65 grand kind of mark. That's what the organization we were working with was paying before this engagement. And so we ended up moving forward with that provider E, that 8.32, and found some tremendous savings while also improving the data quality that they were able to have for their consumer enrichment. And I think the next thing important to go over is, okay, we need to talk about how that BQI score actually evaluates the quality of the data. And we look to kind of combine the two, both looking at how can we derive kind of traditional data quality metrics based on metadata available about a data set, but also understand some of that data provenance, and even further than that, understand the relationship longevity between a provider and a buyer given a specific use case, and also and given the information readily available about that data set. So those first two look to really get into provenance and traditional data quality metrics, understanding data integrity from a data collection and kind of processing. What happens to data when it comes into the organization? Where does it come from? And what kind of collection techniques are used? Does it come from Internet of Things, or does it come from surveys? Does it come from mobile ad collection? Things of that nature, but also understanding what kind of instance accuracy validation measures are used. Is the data itself evaluated against a third-party auditor? This would be something like a truth set or a Neutronian, or is it, if in the example of consumer data, is the validity of the PII evaluated against the NCOA as it changes on a monthly basis? That'd be the national change of address. And then data lineage, understanding how close to the first, to the original source is it? So is it first or zero party? Zero party referring to those that have it comes straight from the individual consumer or the party that it's about, but it's also voluntarily given up. Or is it from partners, so second party data, or is it from aggregators in terms of third party data? So understanding where it comes from and how it has changed along the way does a great job of indicating the quality of a data set, because there's so many changes that happen as data goes through different hands. And then those bottom three, that market sentiment, and getting an understanding of how that data has been used for the specific use case in the past and what kind of success has been had with it is crucial to understanding whether it might work for your organization. And then those last two are really around trying to understand whether the relationship and whether the speed to implementation are going to be successful and long lasting. So the quality of the organization refers to things such as how many data breaches someone has had in the last 5 years. Are they SOC 2 compliant? What is their financial stability? How new are they? Trying to understand what that company looks like, what kind of service you may get, and then also how long you're going to be able to do business with them. And then the ease of implementation looks at different details around the licensing and the contract of a data set that may make it easier or harder. So a good example of this is if there's in a contract a clause that the data can only be used for a particular business unit, but you want to use it across your organization, that might be something you want to be able to know and want to be able to evaluate to make sure it fits the use case you want it to, but also future ones as well. And what we do, and you saw this in the previous slide actually, was we score that quality and then we plot it against pricing to give a derivation of value for the data set, for each data set, so you can have an understanding of the options available to you in the market. And this has kind of been developed along with some partners and that we've been working with. We're currently on a technical committee with the Data and Trust Alliance, IBM, Red Hat, Cisco, Microsoft, to mention a few, working on a technical committee through Oasis Open around the Data and Trust Alliance's data provenance standards, which focuses, as Kate had touched on earlier, the importance of data provenance as it is disclosed through the metadata available about a data set. So this goes through, as you can see there, source, provenance, and use. So understanding where the data comes from and specifically what applications can I use it in and where might I get in trouble. So this is things like consent documentation location, understanding whether privacy enhancing technologies are used, whether data has been anonymized. And then you'll see there also another detail I'd like to point out is that confidentiality classification, understanding whether there's sensitive data actually involved in this data set. But yeah, we've been doing a lot of work here and these standards should be published soon. And so I'm really excited to see what that version 1 looks like and how we can support providers in adopting these standards and being a little more transparent about the data sets that they have so that buyers can have a better understanding, have more confidence and develop these long-lasting relationships.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview, Wyatt. All right, so we are going to move into the Q&A section of this webinar. So this is your time to ask any questions you have either for Andy or Wyatt. You can ask them for me as well, although I am not an expert on this call. And we're going to go through, how we assess data quality, what the standards are, what kinds of frameworks can be used, actionable key steps and takeaways, things like that. So don't be shy. Feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the toolbar and submit questions while we're going through these. We also do at Blue Street Data have a free resourcing guide that walks through how to assess data quality for any data sets in any industry that you're working in. So I'll send that in the chat while we're answering these questions here. But I'm going to kick it over to you, Andy. And to start out with, tell us a little bit more about your experience with building data companies, data tools, buying data. How has that evolved over time? And sort of what's your view on data quality assessments today?
Well, first of all, Kate, I would say you are an expert. Even though you're the moderator on here, you are an expert. So you feel free to jump in and answer questions as well. Yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot. I mean, in the 1990s, as I mentioned, we were focused on mining any data that we could find out of the former Soviet Union. So we were literally at times taking a copier and copying financial statements in the back rooms of banks and then putting that onto the web to in order for companies and banks to use that. And so when you think about that, it's like anything we can get our hands on would be great and it would be useful. And as we've evolved over 30 years, we now use that data in different ways. I mean, to use that data without a model, yes, you might be looking at it sort of for information or descriptive and diagnostic, but we're very focused on using models to help drive decision making. So you can think about that as the engine and the data as the fuel. The engines have become more and more sophisticated, whereas in the beginning, the fuel was just anything that we could dig out of the ground. That just doesn't hold anymore. So the requirements for quality and provenance have really exploded. We need that. We know that the closer that we get to the source, the better. We know completeness is important, et cetera. But now it's become even more important with generative AI, LLMs, and our worry about, the outcomes of those models. And we can only get there by really holding ourselves, and meaning companies as well as data providers, holding them to certain standards that ensure that we're going to get good output from those models.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Andy. And I'm curious how and why you can chime in on this as well, how other industries have evaluated quality up to this point, and how you see if any of those principles apply to quality as well, or if it's a pretty standalone island industry of evaluating quality.
No, I think I'll start off, Wyatt, and you please jump in. But I mean, we see this in other industries, certainly. You just think about ISO standards, right? So in different industries, the importance of quality often equates into yield or into, if you think about manufacturing environment. And so those companies got together and basically said, look, we want to be able to rely on the raw materials that we're using. We don't want to have to go through a huge rigor of testing in order to accept those raw materials. So you come up with standards like ISO standards. And I think that's a good example for what we should be thinking about on the data side, because as I mentioned, that raw material is the data. And here I would like to point out that we often think about data as data, but data has different sources, right? Some we generate ourselves off of, companies off of your information systems. Other data that comes into our environment comes from outside, either free data sources or data that we purchase. And we really need to be thinking about those as two different data sets, because and hold them to different standards, because you're letting somebody in your front door that you may never have met before, right? So you want to understand that, or you want to feel comfortable and have that trust in that data in order to put it into our manufacturing process or our analytic engines.
Awesome. That's a great analogy. Wyatt, over to you. Tell us a little bit more about you and your team's thought process in building out how Bluetree Data scores data quality. So what factors were you considering and weighing? How does that relate to how other industries have scored data quality, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I honestly, I'm going to steal Andy's kind of raw materials kind of analogy and kind of look at what we started with was trying to understand throughout the data buying process, what are the questions that instill trust in the buyer as they're looking to make a purchase decision. And so this is where understanding things like traditional quality metrics are so important. But then in addition to that, also looking at, hey, what are the kind of details around the contract, the use, the privacy of the data that we need to take into account to make sure that our organization isn't liable for any bad acting on behalf of the data provider, but also that when we use it, we're using it in an ethical manner and something that doesn't expose our customers or our organization to any risk from that perspective. So we took a look at through interviews with different providers, with different buying organizations, and then also going through the procurement process ourselves, understanding, hey, what are all the questions that we can possibly ask that would give us an indication of how well the data will perform once we actually get it into our hands and try and integrate it into our models, and then how usable are those outputs going to be. And so a very common thing, for example, and a lot of organizations and industries are moving towards trying to find ways to reduce discrimination in terms of the outputs of models. And so this is something that can be, a lot of people are really interested in that outputs side of things and trying to understand how can we reduce discrimination in terms of the outputs. But when you look at the inputs and understand, hey, you don't have a data sample that's representative of the actual population, because if you're using surveys as a collection technique, there might be selection bias or there might be confirmation bias in the surveys that you end up using. So understanding how representative of it is crucial to understanding how that's going to reduce the amount of or increase the amount of discrimination that you may find in the actual outputs of your model. So there's things like that throughout the process, throughout the conversations that we've had over the past 2.5 years that have really fed into how we created those standards. Very similar to other things you'll see in other industries. I mean, you see this, there's a reason why the Food and Drug Administration exists at the moment. It's because drugs and food need to be tested for health. And then there's even standards that go beyond that. For example, USP looks at different supplements to try and certify those. So there's organizations both at the government level and beyond that look to certify the things that we put into our bodies. And similar to this, understanding the things that go into your models is going to be crucial to understand whether you're going to get the results that you want to drive.
Yeah, I like that point a lot, Wyatt. So understanding how important data quality is, this is both a question to Andy and Wyatt. What are sort of the top things that teams and data buyers should keep in mind when they go out to buy a data set and to integrate it into systems that they already have built? So if they know data quality is really important, but I just don't know every step to get there, what are some key things to keep in mind or some of the most important aspects of data quality to be on the lookout for?
Well, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that one of the biggest things that you need to understand in order to find the right kind of data and derive quality is understanding the use case at a core level. This is something we do a lot with our clients, is take time and understand what it is, the problem or the result that they're trying to find a solution for. And based on that, how does that affect the data or the specific data quality that we may want to is most important to that organization. So something as simple as the use of privacy enhancing technologies is going to be something that is really important when you're evaluating kind of credit card data or transaction data to do, for example, market sizing, because you want to make sure that you want to ensure that those people's data is protected and your organization isn't open to any risk. but also the data quality itself is still at a high level. Whereas if you're looking at data, for example, we worked on a project with a firm that was trying to do market sizing based on roofing type in the presence of skylights. That's something completely different. There's no data privacy problems there, but also you run into issues because a lot of that information, a lot of data around that is either at the satellite level, where you have to use neural networks to determine the presence of a skylight, or it's off of listings from a Zillow website. So you're not as close to first party data. And so you may run into issues there. So it really depends on the use case. And so that's where I would want to start, honestly, and where I would recommend most teams really drilling down so that they can ask the right questions to get the answers they want.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I had that as like number one point when you asked the question, Kate, which is what are we solving for? Once we know what we're solving for, we know that models, and we can think about that as math, become the next important. Like, how are we going to model this question? How are we going the answer to this question? And once we do that, then we can start to think about, well, what data do we need in order to put into that engine to solve the problem? And that data is, it's really interesting that we see companies more and more looking for unique data that is going to give them an advantage over their competition. If they can look at a particular problem, maybe it's the pricing of some product, or maybe it is the market sizing or approach to a market. If they can find detailed, granular information that is very different than what other companies may be using, their competitors, that will give them an advantage in their model, either from increased performance of that model or perhaps prescriptions of how do I get more business because of the output of that model. So it's the thing that I want to start drive home in on this is that don't just think that you have to go for data that's commonly available. That if you think of a variable, the skylight one is a good one that Wyatt said, hey, I want to know houses that have skylights. Well, where the heck do you get that data? It's like, it's out there. You just need to know how and where to find it and what the right data is for the right problem.
Right. Yeah, that's great. We only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to pull one more audience question here from Q&A. This one is for Andy specifically. So it's difficult to get all stakeholders aligned on data buying and quality thresholds. What recommendations do you have to get everyone aligned internally on quality thresholds for data and the buying process?
Well, yeah, great question. I'm actually going to steal a couple lines from, I was over at Carnegie Mellon the other day watching, I was at a conference and there was the keynote there. It was Steve Turk, who's the Chief Data Officer of JP Morgan Chase. And he did a great job of describing sort of how important a single source of truth is for an organization. And that if you can get everybody aligned on, hey, the core data to run our operations, to run our models is in this single source, we should be building our pipelines for models and business decisions off of that single source. You're going to say to me, okay, Andy, that's not a new thought. We know this concept of single source, which is I had a post conversation with Steve. What I was really curious about is that we don't want to hamper the creativity from around the edges, around people doing their own analysis and getting data and working with it. How do we keep a single source of truth and yet have that data on the outskirts still be relevant? And the answer is great, which is it has to be contributed back in. For you to use it on the fringes, it needs to be contributed back into the single source. And so which I thought was just a great way to think about sort of managing your most important asset going forward, which is your data asset. So if you want to get everybody aligned, I would say understand that everybody needs to be working off the same data, the same definitions, and that they are not hampered by a single source, but they can also contribute to it, and that becomes the centerpiece of solving or using your models or solving problems or doing analysis, whatever it is with your data. So it probably doesn't get exactly to the answer that the person who asked the question had, but I think it is a unique way of looking at data as a whole.
Yeah, and just to add on real quick here at the end, one of the things that we see and I think is crucial for the clients that are successful that we work with is making sure that the end user of the data is involved in the sourcing process. Sometimes we'll see that we're working with an organization's procurement arm solely, and so they don't necessarily have the data literacy to ask the right questions or to give us the necessary context to understand what they're actually asking. And this is why we start at that use case level. But making sure that there's a user of the data or someone from the data team or the specific business unit that's looking to drive that outcome as a part of the sourcing process allows more alignment within the organization, because there's more clarity in terms of both the goal that you're trying to drive, but also the kind of considerations or stipulations that you want to have in terms of what you're trying to source or the usage of it.
Yeah, that's great. Wyatt and Andy, thank you both for your time today and your insights. Thanks to everyone who's joining us. We've got a couple more episodes coming up in this series of Building with Better Data. So go ahead over to Blue Street Data on LinkedIn, follow us and sign up for any upcoming webinars. And then also feel free to get in touch with our team through LinkedIn or our email team@bluestreetdata.com if you have any additional questions that you want to go through. Thank you again, Andy and Wyatt, and thanks everyone for joining today.
Thanks, Kate. See you, Wyatt.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.